Thank you. Thank you very much, Wanjiru. You have asked me to look at the BBI risks and opportunities, which I think is a very, very important subject. And I have structured my presentation in terms of starting with an introduction, which then, of course, move on and look at a few issues of process, then move to issues of content. And under issues of content, I will have to look at some of the content issues that touch on finances, some content issues that touch on functions, some content issues that may have to touch on the county structures and the institutions that protect devolution. And there will be other content issues that may go into questions of intergovernmental relations. So back to the introduction, I want to point out that we have done 10 years with the Constitution, and one should be able to say that that is sufficient time to identify challenges, gaps, and problems that we may need to sort out through amendments to the Constitution. Of course, we need to note that some of the challenges and gaps that may have been identified are things that may be sorted out through policy, administrative action, and legislation, and not necessarily amendments to the Constitution. In fact, it can be argued that part of the problems we are facing today are as a result of our own failure to implement the Constitution by putting in place proper policies, putting in place proper legislation, reviewing old legislations properly to make them consistent with the new Constitution, and so on. And so we need to be careful to know or single out what are the aspects of constitutional amendment and what are those for policy. And my argument has been that to be able to go forward, we may want to ask ourselves questions that go beyond the proposing policies, legislations, and so on, and ask ourselves, what is it that made it impossible for us in the past to pass these policies? And what are we doing to deal with that? Because it might repeat itself, even with amendments to the Constitution. So what are we going to do about that? And so having pointed out that, we note that BBI, therefore, seems to be coming in to say, can we relook at the Constitution? Can we amend it? Can we see how to change some of these things? And therefore, it presents opportunities for players in the field of devolution to see whether we can strengthen devolution and improve it. But we must also be careful to note that in that may also be risks, because there are some players who may want to take opportunity through these BBI amendments and proposals to weaken devolution or undermine devolution. And so that is the background from which we should proceed when we are looking at the BBI risks and opportunities. Now, if I move to the process issues, of course, I may not want to go into the processes that have already passed regarding how BBI was established, how it has worked, because I think there has been a lot of secrecy in that, and the public may feel a bit left out. But I want to look at process issues from the point of view of what the BBI report itself has set out. The report has made recommendations in a number of respects. Number one, it has made recommendations for amendments to the Constitution. Number two, there are recommendations for consequential legislation, some of the legislations that need to be made consequent to the amendments. It has also made recommendations for consequential amendments to existing legislation. You know, there are new legislations and there are those that need to be amended. And then it has made recommendations about public policy measures that may need to be taken to implement some of the recommendations. And finally, it has made recommendations about administrative measures. Now, a fundamental issue that we need to address is that these recommendations raise a number of very difficult and important process issues about the BBI, how we should move forward from here. And one of the fundamental questions is, what is supposed to go to the referendum? Is it just the proposed amendments to the Constitution, or are we taking to the referendum all these things, including the consequential legislations, the consequential amendments to existing legislation, public policy issues, and administrative issues? Are we taking all these things to the referendum, or what should be going to the referendum? Number two, the question is, or should we separate these things in terms of debate and discussion, and in terms of preparation of what is going to the referendum, so that we are saying we should first address the proposed amendments to the Constitution, go to the referendum, and once we are finished with the referendum, we then have to deal with the consequential legislations and the policies and so on. Or the question is, should we structure the process going forward, the debates, the discussions, and the amendments in such a manner that we discuss all these things together, or we stagger the discussions? Because if you see a lot of emotions coming out there, some of them are about the things that are in policy, the things that are in administrative action, and some that are even just about legislation, but not about the Constitution. And my fear is that if we don't separate these things, the public might go to the referendum with all these things in mind. Their decisions about the proposed constitutional amendments might be clouded by what is proposed in consequential legislation, by what is said about policy, and what is said about administrative action. And this will be dangerous. We might end up with a referendum result that is not well informed because it was clouded by these other things that have been tied to the amendments to the Constitution. So this is a question civil society needs to address very carefully and approach, because you can see the BBI, some participants are saying, we have closed the door, we cannot discuss. I don't think that's the right way. They must be pushed to open the door. And I'm saying this because we have admitted in the introduction that 10 years is adequate time to look at some amendments. And it will be rather foolish for us, players in devolution, to stay away. And these people go on with this thing and they end up with the amendments that undermine devolution. We must find and push and get room to make contributions so that these things move on in a better way. And to just highlight my fears about people's mind being clouded and decisions being guided by the combining of these things, you need to look at the complaints coming from the health workers. They are complaining, they are saying they can oppose everything, but the reason is because the health commission they have been asking for has been placed in legislation, proposed amendments to the health legislation. If you look at the proposed amendments, some of them make sense, they are reasonable, and perhaps the problem is that why not put it in the constitution? And one may want to ask, those ones that are saying, oh, we don't want too many constitutional commissions. Some talk about cost. But the point is that even if you make the health commission a statutory body, you will still have to finance it. So why not just put it in the constitution if that is what they want? After all, we will finance, whether it is in the constitution or it is in statute, we will have to finance that commission. So we need to look at those things from that perspective and be careful to see how to move on so that we avoid some of these things and move on well. Now, if we fail to separate these discussions and activities, we are most likely to have some of these things declared unconstitutional on the ground that we are trying to subject enactment of ordinary legislation and formulation of policy to a referendum when the constitution does not require that. People can go to court and challenge this. So separation must be clearly made. Now, if we look at the constitution amendment itself, bill, you will clearly see that there is provision in it about, in section 67 of the amendment bill, there is provision about consequential legislation, even with a Schedule 1 that sets out the legislation that will need to be enacted after enacting the amendments. That clearly implies that these are two separate things, and we therefore must deal with them separately. Although we may say one may read the proposed legislative amendments to inform or to understand why certain proposed constitutional amendments have been done, so that you can see whether it is good or not, or something of the sort. And we need to bear that in mind and avoid mixing things. And if you look at that section 67, subsection 2 of the bill, the Constitutional Amendment Bill, it even confers on the Attorney General and the Law Reform Commission the responsibility of preparing the consequential legislations that will eventually be enacted after the Constitution amendment has been done. That therefore suggests that by implication, one can see that we need to separate these things, and therefore look at the proposed legislative bills as merely first drafts of bills that will have to be developed and improved when we focus on that. And if you look at some of those bills, you will see some of them are not fully addressing the issues, and therefore they will need to be opened up. They cannot be said to be cast in stone and that they must be passed in that form. They will have to be discussed further by all participants to improve them after the amendments have been passed on the Constitution and so on. And that therefore must be noted. Now, so that finishes with my discussion on the process, and then it takes me to the content issues. And I need to point out that the BBI should be examined from the content perspective to identify, number one, proposed constitutional amendments that strengthen devolution, which we then can be able to support. Then proposed constitutional amendments that appear to undermine devolution and which we must challenge and see how they can be improved to avoid that. And then proposed new legislations and amendments that strengthen devolution, and proposed new legislations and amendment to legislations that undermine devolution, and we make contribution to improve them. And we must also be able to identify the missing constitution amendments that would have been included to improve devolution, so that if we engage the process, we can be able to point out that whereas what you have put in is good, there are other things missing that we need to add there that will further improve and strengthen devolution. We should also identify missing legislative provisions, either in the new proposed legislations or the proposed amended legislations, so that we can again also propose them for purposes of improving devolution. Now, if we go to the actual content issues, I want to begin with the financial matters, content issues regarding finance, and the proposed constitutional amendments touches on quite a number of financial issues. And I'll begin with the issue of the most recent audited accounts. The constitutional amendment bill is bringing in amendments that appear to improve or strengthen devolution, in my view, when they say that when the division of revenue bill is being done, we can rely on the audited accounts presented by the Auditor General, even before those accounts have been approved by Parliament. This, in my view, is good, because in the past we have suffered from the fact that the auditor presents these things in the National Assembly, but it takes very long to have them approved. So when we do division of revenue, many times we end up relying on very old accounts, which are several years back, when we should have been relying on more recent ones. And to me, that is an amendment that may need to be supported, because it is trying to address some of the problems the county governments have been suffering when it comes to division of revenue. Number two, there are amendments to the to Article 203 that deal with the criteria for revenue sharing. The bill has proposed to expand or to increase the criteria that is given under Article 203 by adding in a criteria that says that they need to eradicate corruption practices and wastage of public resources. Now, this is a very, very interesting criteria, but to some extent worrisome, because we need to know that while corruption is a problem for our country at both national and county level, historical experience shows that there have been perceptions that tend to make corruption look like a county issue and present national government as clean. And so my worry about this proposed criteria is that since the national government institutions are the ones that play a lot of role in a division of revenue, they are most likely to use it against county governments to say, oh, we are giving them money, but they just waste it in corruption, so we can reduce what we give them after all, forgetting the fact that a lot is lost in national government through corruption also. So this is still troublesome. I still don't know how to place it, but it is something we need to think about very, very carefully and see how to go about. Now, they have also proposed to introduce a criteria that says they need to ensure the attainment of the economic and social rights guaranteed under Article 43. This one I can emphatically say it's a good addition to the criteria, because in the past, many of you have heard me arguing that when you look at the intersection between assignment of the intersection between the Bill of Rights and the assignment of functions, we sometimes end up finding that certain rights then impose obligations, so that what may have looked like discretionary powers actually become obligations of the government. And I've always argued that Article 43 creates rights, many of which fall within the functional areas of the county governments, and therefore impose obligations on the county governments. Yet that doesn't seem to be seriously taken into account when the division of revenue is being done. And so to my mind, inclusion of this as a specific criteria is going to be useful, because the Commission on Revenue Allocation, Parliament, and all other institutions will require to take into account the fact that the county governments have a large part of the functions that fall under the Article 43 rights, and therefore that makes it an obligation for them, and therefore entitles them to receive more money to ensure that they can be able to deliver those rights. Then there is a third one that talks about the need to ensure that the average amount of money allocated per person to a county with the highest allocation does not exceed 3 times the one for a county in a lowest in the lowest allocation. That one, of course, they are trying to bring in the issue of we look more at individuals, and you have had debates on that. I don't want to have any firm views on that, but you can think about it. So that Article 203, the criteria has been expanded in that manner. Then number 3 is the issue of the minimum share. The proposed constitution amendment is seeking to amend Article 203, sub-Article 2, to increase the minimum share for the counties from 15% to 35%. And to my mind, that it's obvious for everybody that that is a good development. Then there is the proposal to introduce the Ward Development Fund. This one is troublesome, and I know most of us in civil society have been through the courts over these issues of CDF and Ward Development Fund, but they are proposing it, and in proposing it, they are saying these funds will be a 5% from the county funds, and they go to the wards. My big problem with this is that the BBI framers have failed to tell us explicitly that the Ward Development Fund should replace the Constituency Development Fund. So by failing to specifically outlaw CDF, it becomes obvious this is a sweetener that is being given to the MCAs to allow them to support the process. But at the end of the day, we will then end up with the CDF as well as the Ward Development Fund. And this will be too many funds, and looking at the cases that have been decided before, we will end up looking like we are introducing a third level or several other levels to share in the funds, and this will be a problem. But the bigger problem is the fact that although the proposed amendment says Parliament shall make legislation to provide for how this fund will be managed, chances are that it will be a legislation that will allow the MCAs to play a role. And yet we know that the courts have already ruled that issues of separation of powers come in when the legislators who are supposed to play the oversight role are also involved in the actual expenditure of funds voted. So that has a problem, and we may want to take it up. Then there is the question of the composition of the CRA. The amendments are proposing to reduce the numbers that are appointed by political parties on the basis of representation in the Senate from 5 to 2. And instead they have created, they have provided for 2 members appointed by governors and 1 member appointed by the professional body for accountants. Now, if you look at the 2 going to governors, you see, maybe it makes sense because the governors have a big stake, the county governments have a big stake in the work of the CRA, and therefore it will be reasonable that they also have some representation or an opportunity to choose people to sit in the CRA the way the National Assembly and or the way the parties in the National Assembly and in the Senate choose. So no strong views, but other members can have their own views on that. Now, then there are amendments on the annual division of revenue, where they are seeking to they have deleted the Article 218 and introduced a new one that gives a lot of details and timelines on when the division of revenue should be done. And to me, that is good. They further introduce another section that addresses county allocation of revenue with the details and timelines on how Parliament, the 2 houses of Parliament should work. And I think that is a good thing. Then there is the role of budget in implementation of fundamental rights. There are amendments to Article 220, which are introducing a requirement on the governments when they are doing budgets to give an explanation of previous and current or proposed budget measures taken to give effect to the implementation of the rights under the rights as provided for by Article 21. To my mind, that is a good thing because it is forcing the government to focus their budgets towards implementing rights. And then there are amendments that seek to limit the national government when the national government by requiring it to base its estimates of expenditure and division of revenue on the Division of Revenue Act passed by Parliament. Now, this amendment is trying to restrict national government, and to my mind is reasonable, so that its expenditure is based on the division of revenue and not just left open, so that they can budget without basing on the division of revenue, while county governments are required to base their budgets on the division of revenue. And then the power of the national government in supplementary expenditure, there are also amendments that are seeking to limit it, so that they are forced to make sure that the amount is part of the national government's equitable share revenue determined by the act, and that the supplementary is focused on emergencies and not just on anything. To my mind, those are limitations on the national government, which means the national government has been sometimes using these provisions to expend monies in a wrong way, and to my mind, that is good. And then, of course, the county appropriation bills, they are saying they don't have to be based on the division of revenue that has been passed. And I think two reasons come in. Number one, sometimes the passing of the division of revenue delays, and therefore delays county governments in passing their bills, the appropriation bills. But number two, county governments do not only appropriate money they receive from the national share, they also appropriate money that they collect locally, and I think that amendment is reasonable. There is an amendment to Article 225 that empowers the minister to stop transfer of revenue to counties and other entities, and I have problems with that, because we have already complained about stoppage of transfer disguised as delay in releasing of funds, thereby avoiding the safeguards that the Constitution had put in place. And what is being attempted here, in my mind, to my mind, is not good. Now, then there are proposed amendments in the so-called Public Finance Management Act through what is called the Public Finance Amendment, Finance Laws Amendment Bill, where they are trying to introduce something called the County Assemblies Fund. You need to go to that, through that. There is section 24A of the Public Finance Management Act, which is being introduced. And it is worrisome because this fund might appear to be inconsistent with the provisions of Article 207, which establishes a revenue fund for each county. If you look at this one that is being proposed in an act, is supposed to be a fund for all the county assemblies. Then from it, then the money is released to accounts of each county assembly. And you start wondering who will be managing this fund and so on. Of course, one would say the county assemblies have been complaining that sometimes the county executives don't give them money and so on. But if we are not careful, the MCAs will run riot with these funds when they are left with all this freedom, and we might run into problems. So we need to look at it a bit carefully and see how to go about it. Now, when it comes to functions, this is one of the most disappointing areas because I think before that, I need to mention that from the perspective of what is missing, we have previously complained that Article 225 envisages a treasury that is an independent entity and serves all both levels of government. And one would have expected amendments that either to the Constitution or to the Public Finance Management Act that establish a treasury that is an independent organ instead of an instrumentality of national government, but that has not been done. So we may need to frame amendments that address that. But on functions, the only thing you see on functions is the transfer of the Nairobi functions to the national government. Yet we all have agreed that the functional assignment is one of the most difficult area of our constitution and devolution. And this should have been an opportunity for us to clarify functions. I have in the past talked about the need to create 3 lists of functions. This has not been done. We need to do it. We also have had 10 years to enable us to see whether some functions that we assigned to national government would be better done at the local, at the county level. And we have argued in the past that educational functions, the aspects of infrastructure in schools, both secondary and primary, would better be a county function, and then teachers, a curriculum, and other things remain to national government. No recommendations have been made about this, and we need to pursue it. So that is an issue we need to look at. Now, when we come to the content issues on structure of government, of county government, and institutions that protect devolution, I need to point out that there are amendments proposed. Number 1, to require the governor candidates to nominate persons of the opposite gender as their running mates, and a lot of debate can come out on that, but it is there. Then there are amendments that do away with the nomination of women, or the gender MCAs that will give us the required gender balance by political parties. Instead, they have now said they should be elected through a proportional representation on a party list, and to my mind, that is good. Then, of course, there is the issue of the Senate and its role. We would have expected a lot of amendments proposed on how to strengthen the Senate. This has not been done. All they have done is to say that we expanded to 94 members, so that each county elects 2, 1 man, 1 woman, which is good in terms of gender balance. But the downside of that is that overall, we are expanding the legislature. We have expanded the Senate. We have expanded the National Assembly, and yet we should be trying to reduce them. I need to point out that recently Italy passed a referendum to reduce parliament. So in my view, while creating multi-member constituencies, electing 1 man and 1 woman is a good idea, it should be done in a context of reduced constituencies, so that we can have a Senate of 94 members, but we should have a National Assembly of perhaps just 200 members, so that you have 100 constituencies, each electing 2 members. It gives you 200 plus 94 Senate. You have a house of just close to 300, and in my view, that would be a good idea. So we need to think through other amendments on the Senate on how to strengthen it, or amendments to legislation, perhaps to create a link. We have complained about the lack of link between the Senate as a representative of the counties and county governments and the county governments, and we may need to create a link that may be tied to the participation requirements. If you look at Article 118, it requires Parliament to facilitate and facilitate participation and involvement, and we could interpret the obligation of the Senate to include consultation with the county governments, because they represent county governments, as part of their obligation to facilitate participation. And so we need amendments on that. And then finally, intergovernmental relations, there is a new proposed legislation called the National Economic and Social Council bill, which seeks to establish a National Economic and Social Council bill. I view that as a body that is supposed to be an intergovernmental body, especially when you look at the functions it is supposed to perform, and therefore it means that the composition of that body should be kind of intergovernmental. But if you look at the composition they are proposing, all other members are national government, and only one member in a council of more than 10 members, only one member is a representative of the county governments. And yet this council is supposed to address questions of national planning, and proper national planning must look at both the county plans and national plans. And to my mind, that is something that needs to be enhanced to make it strongly an intergovernmental body. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mtaha Kangu.
Yes.
Unfortunately, with virtual, we can't clap. Maybe we can snap, because I think that based on the comments that are coming in the chats, a lot of people have appreciated what you've said. This is an excellent foundation, and we are getting requests to share the recording because I believe it's very loaded. You've shared so much, and we appreciate that. Because of time, I will only allow a couple of questions or quick reactions from any two participants, just so that we can honor our philosophy and belief on public participation. I can see Linton has clapped. Yes, you can use the claps online. So I have an opportunity for only two interventions, if any. You know, people might even be overwhelmed and unable to engage at this stage. So if I don't get an indication of any questions, Dr. Mtaha, we might actually then be able to wind up. And I hadn't even prepared a question. I hadn't anticipated this scenario. Suffice to,
I have a question. This is George.
Thank you, George.
Hand up. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Mtaha Kangu. I'm George Awala. I work with the Voluntary Service Overseas and also chair of the SDGs Kenya Forum. One of the questions I have now that seems like there was a recent meeting between some of the two protagonists around the BBI, the president and the deputy president. What difference do you think that makes? Does it mean that there's now opportunity for further dialogue and discussion? And how should civil society players prepare themselves to enable them to effectively influence the process? Because we know that it's had previous challenges, but now maybe there could be a window that's opening.
Now, in my view, it is a wrong idea for anybody to say they have closed the door on such a fundamental issues. And whether or not the president met the deputy president, I think it is important that they consider a structured framework to take further input so that we don't go all the way and lose. So that means, therefore, that civil society ought to agitate to be given some room to make input. Of course, being tactful enough not to be sucked into the politics of the two sides, so that when you are even making very sensible contribution, people start pursuing you or labeling you as belonging to one group or another. We need to take an objective position and say, look, there are good things in these proposals, but there are also bad ones, and there are also those missing we need to add so that we make the document good for all of us. I think we need to push for that. If it means that we use that window to push for the discussion, I think we ought to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's an excellent intervention. Might there be another question to Dr.
Yes.
Please proceed. Please proceed.
Abraham here. Thanks, Doc. That was really detailed and insightful. What, in your opinion, is the problem we are trying to solve? BBI or no BBI? What problem from your reading? We all have different readings. Are we trying to solve as a country?
Now, this is a very tough one, but I want to say that as we have said in the past, Kenyans seem to have maneuvered their way and imposed certain standards on the elites, but the elites have not been comfortable with those standards and values, and using their role and offices in implementing the constitution have been playing a rearguard to try and take back some of the values we put in the constitution. And so where we are now, we should be able to say that it is yet another opportunity to try and seal the loopholes of those who have been playing rearguard so that we get the constitution properly implemented. Of course, loaded in all these, politicians always will play their own interests and they look at things from their own interests and not the values. Just the other day, I was reading a very interesting book. They called the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, and it seems to be saying that there are no values in politics. In fact, politics are just about being cunning, and they even say that might is right in politics, and therefore the ends justify the means. So we need to accept that reality that while as Kenyans we may want to have some idea of values and a system, idea of a good system of governance, the politicians, on the other hand, they don't care about values. So in trying to push what we think is good, we really need to know how to maneuver around the politicians. And that's why sometimes you see some normally say, okay, if it means giving a little of what they want so that they may allow what we want, you may have to do that. So these are some of the challenges we are facing. Thank you.
Dr. Tahakangu, I will ask, just share some of the comments for maybe your final wrap up. Some of these will be canvassed some more in the thematic groups, but we would treasure your view on these. So one is, there's a question here, which is a broad question. Will BBI help solve the problems bedeviling devolution? It's a broad question, I think, looking for a yes, kind of more clarity, maybe a less nuanced answer. There's also, will it solve the winner takes all problem? How come it hasn't addressed the financing of civic education? Is it taking away the safe space for women? And what are the financial implications? These are huge questions. Maybe you can just give us your thoughts as you give us your parting shot, kindly.
Now, maybe I begin with the space for women. In my view, we have been stuck with the issue of women for quite some time. And the BBI seems to be, to some extent, they are struggling with how do we meet this issue of women and so on. And that's why in the Senate, they have gone the long hawk of what some of us had proposed a few years ago, creation of multi-member constituents, these 2 members, a man and a woman, which then gives you 50-50. But of course, you know, when it comes to the National Assembly, the method they are using may not give us 50-50 or even 1/3. So we still need to see how to go about it. But as I've pointed out, we must do this in the context of recognizing that Kenya cannot afford a huge parliament. And therefore, we need to be very, very firm, bold, and say, much as people may hold dearly to their constituencies, we may need to reduce the number of constituencies. After all, in this country, at one time, we used to have a parliament of 158 members, and that included 12 nominated members, which means that the constituencies were less than 150. So we need to take a bold move, reduce the constituencies, make them multi-member, 1 man, 1 woman, and we would have addressed the issue of women and so on. Now, number 2, you have talked about the issue of whether we can solve the problems of devolution. The answer is yes and no. If we don't push for their reopening so that we can put more in and rectify where there are problems, we might not be able to address the problems of devolution. They might continue. But if we can push for this, we would be able to. Now, secondly, I said at the beginning, if you read the BBI report, you will notice that they are complaining about the failure of government to pass policies on certain issues, or sometimes passing wrong policies. And that's why they have taken the route of giving what they call policy principles, or principles for formulation of public policy. And I said at the beginning that, but they have not told us what causes that. Why is it that we can do a constitution, we can do legislation, but those who are supposed to do policy fail to do that? If we don't identify that and address it, we still have a problem. But the truth of the matter is that the problem is the issue of vested interests. People understanding that we need policies of this kind, but because they have personal interests they want to protect, they want to continue with the old system. So that attitude issue will not be solved by laws. We have laws. We need something else to address the attitude issue, especially in the elites and how they do their things and how they exercise power when they're given that power. Number 3 is the question of whether we will solve the winner-take-all problem. Now, that one is still a problem in my view, because if you look at the expanded executive that we are being given, you clearly see that if we go on party lines, we will still have a winner-take-all, because the prime minister we have created is a prime minister who has to be appointed by the president. Even if you are to say he is to be elected by parliament, if the president has, the president's party has a majority in parliament, then it is the one that will elect that deputy prime minister. So you will have a president from one party, a deputy president from that party, a prime minister from the same party, 2 deputy prime ministers also likely from that party. So the question is, there will still be a party that feels it has lost everything while another one has won everything. So the issue of winner take all is still a problem. And it will be worsened by the fact that we seem to be expanding the powers of the president, almost going back to the imperial presidency system, where the president appoints the deputy president, appoints a prime minister, appoints deputies, appoints ministers, and is not even required to know when it comes to appointment of principal secretaries. He now can actually appoint them without vetting by parliament, according to what the BBI is saying. And to my mind, that may just enhance the winner-take-all issue instead of solving it. Unless we are saying that when elections are coming, then we will be kind of killing all other parties, and you have everybody looking around for the party that is likely to win, and you all go there and negotiate within that party to be given some slot. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again, Dr. Mutaha Kangu, for that very illuminating presentation and for those excellent questions and very well answered. And I really can't summarize or attempt to, but I think the takeaway point for us is you're saying 10 years on, it is a good time for us to review the Constitution and look at what's not working. But we need to be ready to take bold decisions. Yeah. And some of those decisions touch on some of the issues that hurt Kenyans, or that Kenyans care about the most, like the cost of government, the size of government, because Kenyans are really unhappy about this. But what you're saying is that we need to be bold. If we are unhappy about it, we then have to say, reduce. And that means people have to give up something. You're also telling us that there is still a lot of confusion in the documents, and that it is very important that the process, one, be opened up, and that issues be separated for clarity. You're then also telling us that the BBI doesn't fully deal with the issue of non-implementation, vested interest, and that's the elephant in the room for us. How do we deal with these interests? And then, of course, one of the big issues that has come to plague us, Kenyans have become aware, is this winner takes all. And you know, the presidential imperial presidency. And you're saying BBI actually is not dealing with that. It's giving more, you know, going back to the more imperial form of presidency. So you've also touched on very many other positives, some negatives and gaps in this document as it stands. So we've talked about process, we've talked about substance, and we thank you because you're opening up our minds. So thank you once again, Dr. Mutaha Kangu. Thank you to all of you for staying with us. And I'd like the technical team to take over and help us transit into the breakout groups. Thank you so much.